B'Shem Hashem Na'aseh v'Natzliach. Hello, Achim Yekarim. How are you? I wanted to follow up with another part to what we were talking about last week regarding observing Shabbat, specifically for non-Jews, for Noahides. Now, again, as we talked about last week, if a non-Jew is in the process of converting into Judaism, into Orthodox Judaism, they're allowed to observe the Shabbat 99%, all the way until the last stage of the conversion, when they have a specific date of conversion, and then at that point, the Rabbi and the Dayan of the Beit Din will tell them that they're able to start keeping Shabbat 100%. Why? Because they are going through a conversion, so they have to keep it as obviously practice. And then eventually keep it 100%, because already at that stage they're in essence considered a ger. But if a person decides to stop and he doesn't want to go forward with the conversion, and he wants just to, or she wants to just remain a Noahide, then at that point they have to stop keeping Shabbat, because as the Rambam said, and it also mentions in the Gemara, that a non-Jew that observes Shabbat receives a heavenly death penalty. It's a punishment. They're not allowed to keep Shabbat. So this created a little bit of an uproar last week with some of my loyal followers and students around the world that are either in the process of converting or Noahides, where it's in some cases even a misunderstanding, where people were taking offense to it. Not necessarily my words, because these are obviously not my words, but these are the words of the sages. So first and foremost, we have to understand that when there's a written Torah and there's an oral Torah, there's no offense to be taken, because again, Hashem is not politically correct, and neither are the sages. They say what Hashem said. So anyone that understands that the significance of these sages, whether it be the Rambam, or it be Rabbi Akiva, or be any of these major sages that have lived throughout the generations, has to understand that these are the words of God that He's just given to them to explain to us. So there's no offense to be taken. And you want to take offense with Hashem, good luck. But the point is that this is not to offend to somebody. This is just to explain God's law. So how do we know, or how do we have even more support to this specific issue within regards to not being allowed to keep Shabbat when someone is not Jewish? Last week someone mentioned, but the Shabbat was created before even Am Yisrael. It was given to Adam. That's a mistake. It was not given to Adam, because obviously Adam was created after the Shabbat, and there's no verse that says that Hashem gave him the Shabbat. The first time that Hashem mentions giving the Shabbat to anyone is in Exodus, when He gives it to the entire nation of Israel, before we even arrived at Mount Sinai. And that's the first and last time that it talks about Hashem giving the Shabbat to anyone. He gave it to the nation of Israel. Now, further, one of the main things that people need to understand in regards to Shabbat is not necessarily just a day that we eat and drink and have a good time and go to sleep. There are 39 restrictions that identify Shabbat, that are the things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Some people mistakenly think that it's just you're not allowed to work and you're not allowed to light fire. That's not completely true. There are 39 things that you're not allowed to do. Now, where did we get these 39 things, and how are they connected to this law of Noahide not being allowed to keep Shabbat? So if you go to the book of Exodus, chapter 35, you will see that on verse 2, or actually even the first verse, you see that Moses assembled the entire nation, the entire assembly of the children of Israel, and said to them, "These are the things that Hashem commanded to do." So Moses is dictating the law of Hashem. Verse 2, "On 6 days work may be done, but the seventh day shall be holy for you, a day of complete rest for Hashem. Whoever does work on it shall be put to death. You shall not kindle fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day." So here, once again, it's mentioned again that Hashem is telling us that we're not allowed to work, we're not allowed to light fire on the Shabbat. Why am I mentioning this verse rather than the number of times that it's mentioned before and after? Because if you see that the very next verse, and for the remainder of this chapter, of the remainder of this parasha, it talks about the construction of the tabernacle, which in essence is the holy temple that we had in the desert, and then later on we had the Bet HaMikdash. And it talks about all of the things we did to construct the tabernacle. So the sages ask, why does Hashem have one verse mentioning that we have to keep Shabbat, and then the rest of the chapter, it's construction of a tabernacle? Why are the two connected? Because nothing is done for no reason. Every single word, every single letter is in exactly the precise space of where it needs to be. What's the connection between the two? The 39 restrictions that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat are the very same 39 things that we did to construct the tabernacle. So from here we learn, what are these 39 things? Hashem is telling us, number one, the 39 things that you did to construct my tabernacle, to build my home, my house on earth, these are the same things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. And the second thing that we learn here is that he's teaching us how significant Shabbat is. For all you fellow Jews that are still debating whether you should keep Shabbat or not, and whether you're ready or not, he's telling us here is that even to build my house, even to build my own house, you're not allowed to violate Shabbat. Because the same 39 things that you are going to use to build my house, you're not allowed to do them on Shabbat. So therefore, to even build God's house, you're not allowed to violate Shabbat. So of course you're not allowed to violate Shabbat by driving to Beit Knesset, okay, or any other number of things that people foolishly do when they rationalize it without using the sources of the Torah and the sages that explain these things to us. So this again shows us what are these 39 things. Now why do I mention this? Because obviously we see here that these 39 things and this entire construction of the tabernacle was not given to the nations of the world. The construction of the tabernacle was specifically given to the Jews. So just like these restrictions were given to the Jews, the Shabbat was given to the Jews. Now why was the Shabbat given to the Jews and not to the nations of the world? Because in essence, the Shabbat was a present, a payment, a reward for their obligation. The Jews, unlike the rest of the nations, are commanded and obligated to follow 613 laws, and 7 more that the rabbis and the sages added throughout the years, about 2,000 years ago. So in essence, the 620. No one person can actually do 620 mitzvot. It's not meant for one person to do. Each person has to do their own share, meaning that there's some out of the 620 that are specifically meant for women, some that are specifically meant for the Kohanim, the holy priests, some that are specifically meant just for men, some are specifically meant to just do in the Bet HaMikdash. So no one person can do all of them, because no one person is a man, woman, and a Kohen, and needs in the Bet HaMikdash. Alright, so average, I would say, is somewhere around a couple of hundred as each person needs to do. But the point is that there's a lot of commandments that each Jew is obligated to do, not electively do, obligated to follow all of them. So, as a reward for doing all of this, Hashem gave us his largest treasure, and he gave us the Shabbat. The Noahides, on the other hand, even though they're righteous, even though they follow Hashem's Torah, and they read it, and they love him, and they pray to him, are not obligated, and are not commanded to follow the 620 laws. They're not. They're only obligated to follow the 7 Noahide laws, plus all laws that are common sense. For example, like respecting your parents. That's not one of the 7 Noahide laws, but it's an obvious common sense rule that a Noahide must follow. So, because they're not commanded and not obligated to follow those laws, then they don't get the present of the Shabbat. So this again to explain it to people, especially in the Western world, where things have gone so far away from Hashem's laws by everyone trying to be politically correct. In today's world in America, little kids grow up thinking that just because they participated, they should get an award. So you have these little kids, and they play on different sports teams or different competitions, and they get last place, and they still get a trophy. Why? Because they participated. That's complete nonsense and a way to build a loser. It's not a way to build a winner. Why? Because if you do something and you win, you get a reward. If you don't win, then you try better, you try harder next time, and hopefully you get a reward then. So this is in essence the way the world has worked for since the beginning of time. Today's generation is so far away from Hashem that they want to give rewards just because they don't want to hear anyone cry, but that's not a way that you're supposed to construct the world. This, of course, is similar but not the same to what we're talking about here, is that a Noahide must understand that despite the fact that Hashem also loves you, despite the fact that you also love Hashem, and you may very well actually love Hashem more than many Jews do, but the reality of it is that since you're not taking on yourself the obligation to follow all of the laws, then you cannot take the present that is being gifted to the ones that are following it and that are obligated by it. Because if you don't keep Shabbat, you're not getting punished for it. If you don't keep kosher, you're not getting punished for it. If you don't keep family purity, you're not getting punished for it. The Jew is. The Jew gets a very, very dear punishment for not following these laws. So because they have this obligation, they also have a reward. A Noahide does not have it, and therefore does not have the reward. But a Noahide will always have a choice to convert. If someone wants to keep the Shabbat 100%, then they do have a chance, they do have an opening, the door is always open to convert. And in essence, I think that this should actually motivate some of you that have been 50-50 and have been thinking that you can keep the Shabbat 100% even though you don't want to keep the rest of the laws because you want a vacation once a week, or you want to do the Kiddush and you like the ceremony and you want to be like a halfway Jew. The reality of it is that this should motivate you to go 100%. Why? Because as beautiful as the Shabbat is, so are the rest of the mitzvot. And the more you take on, as you've seen already, the better things are. So if someone really wants to do the will of Hashem and wants to go 100%, then this should be the motivation to get the first place trophy, and not the one that gets you to, you know what, I don't want to play anymore. That's just a nonsensical mentality. One last thing that I want to add in regards to anyone that is keeping Shabbat or trying to keep Shabbat that's not Jewish. There is a major sage that clarified things in regards to resting on Shabbat. Now you're not obligated to work on Shabbat. You cannot work. As a matter of fact, you are allowed to rest on Shabbat, but the rest of the rituals that are Shabbat obligations, like the Kiddush, and the other things that are obligations of Shabbat, that's the stuff that you're not allowed to do. But as far as resting, you actually are allowed to do, and this is in the name of the Khatam Sofer. Khatam Sofer is one of the great sages that lived in the previous generations. Now, first, Rambam said that the prohibitions of a Gentile observing Shabbat are part of the general prohibition for Gentiles not to innovate new laws, not to create their own religion, not to create new laws for Judaism. That's the main reason behind all of this. Why a non-Jew is not allowed to keep Shabbat, but yet not keep anything else. So that's the major reason behind it. Now, Rabbi David Ibn Zimra, which lived about 500 years ago, explains that according to the Rambam, Gentiles are not allowed to keep the Shabbat as if they were commanded to do so. Rather, they're only allowed to observe it as a means of acquiring merits, but not as a means of fulfilling a commandment, because they have no such commandment. So they're not allowed to keep it because there's a commandment, because they don't have that commandment. And to clarify it, the Khatam Sofer says it this way. He says that if a non-Jew rests on Shabbat, he's fulfilled the commandment of resting, so he's allowed to rest on Shabbat. But a non-Jew, a Noahide, is only not allowed to rest when he's doing so as part of a religious service. So you're allowed to rest on Shabbat, but you're not allowed to rest because it's Shabbat. You're not allowed to fulfill the resting because you're resting because it is Shabbat, because in essence that is creating a new law in the Torah, which we're not allowed to do. So yes, you can enjoy yourself, you can have a good time, but if you want to take the whole pie, I encourage you to convert. I encourage you to go through this big journey. It's not easy to convert. It's not easy to comply with all the laws of Judaism, but the gift is significant. So the most important thing that we need to understand is that when it comes to the Torah, when it comes to the teaching and the clarifications of the sages, there's no political correctness. There's no right or wrong to the generation, right or wrong to the culture. None of that. There's the will of Hashem that has been the same since the beginning of time and will be the same until the end of time. So may all of us understand this and live a life that's solely for the purpose of fulfilling Hashem's will, and may Hashem in return fulfill our will. Thank you again for learning with me, and Be'ezrat Hashem, all of your wishes will come true soon.